Feel the dust and chaos of 19th century India as we transport you to the heart of the siege of Lucknow. Picture soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, pushed to their absolute limit. This isn't just history, it's a raw, visceral account of desperate heroism and the unbelievable final charge that cemented legends and forever etched the Victoria Cross into the annals of empire. The date is September 25th, 1857. The location is the British Residency in Lucknow, a sprawling compound of colonial buildings that has been transformed into a festering, bullet-pocked cage. For 87 days, the Union Jack has flown tattered above the banqueting hall, the only sign of defiance in a city swallowed by rebellion. Inside these crumbling walls, 3,000 souls are rotting alive. The air is heavy, not just with the humid oppression of the late monsoon season, but with the cloying, sickly sweet scent of unburied death and the sharp tang of chloride of lime used to mask it. It is a scene of medieval horror imposed upon the Victorian age. Men of the 32nd Regiment, once smart in their red coats, now look like spectres, hollow-cheeked, their uniforms bleached by the sun and stained with the grime of months in the trenches. They move with the lethargy of starvation, conserving energy for the moments when the rebel batteries open up. Civilians, women and children crowd into the Taikhana, the underground rooms, seeking shelter from the relentless mortar fire that rains down indiscriminately. Cholera and dysentery stalk the corridors more effectively than any sepoy sniper. The water they drink is drawn from wells dangerously close to shallow graves, a poisonous necessity that claims more lives than the enemy's lead. The psychological toll is immense. Every day, the besieged garrison scans the horizon, looking for the dust cloud that would signal salvation. They have heard rumors, whispers passed through spies or shouted by loyal servants of a relieving force. But hope has become a dangerous commodity. General Henry Havelock and General James Outram are out there somewhere, fighting their way up from Cawnpore. But the silence from the outside world is deafening. The garrison knows that if the walls are breached, there will be no mercy. The memory of the Bibi Khan massacre at Cawnpore, where women and children were butchered, haunts every waking moment of the defenders. They are fighting not for victory, but for the right to die with a weapon in hand, rather than be slaughtered like cattle. Outside the Residency, the city of Lucknow is a fortress of a different kind. It is a labyrinth of narrow, winding streets, high-walled palaces, and dense urban sprawl. Tens of thousands of rebel sepoys, trained by the British East India Company and armed with British weapons, occupy every vantage point. They have loopholed the walls of the houses overlooking the approach roads, turning entire neighborhoods into kill zones. Artillery batteries are dug in at key intersections, their muzzles trained on the choke points any relieving force must traverse. The rebels know the terrain intimately. To them, the British relief column is walking into a trap of monumental proportions. But the relief is coming. Through weeks of torrential monsoon rains, wading through flooded paddy fields, and fighting off constant ambushes, Havelock's column has finally reached the outskirts of the city. This force is a ragged coalition of desperate men. The Highlanders with their bagpipes, the blue caps of the 1st Bengal Fusiliers, and the light infantrymen of the 90th Perthshire. They are exhausted, their boots falling apart, their uniforms caked in the mud of the Ganges plain. Yet a grim determination propels them forward. They know what lies inside the Residency. They know that every hour they delay is another hour the garrison might not survive. On the morning of the 25th, the relieving force stands at the Alambar, a walled garden on the city's edge. Between them and the Residency lies the Charbar Bridge, a stone artery spanning the canal that serves as the first line of the rebel defense. Beyond that bridge lies the city itself, a maze of death where traditional European formations will be useless. The commanders, Havelock and Outram, study their maps with heavy hearts. They know that to reach the Residency, they must plunge their men into a meat grinder. There is no room for maneuvering, No space for the cavalry to sweep. This will be a soldier's battle, fought at point-blank range, room by room, street by street. The order is given to advance. The men check their percussion caps, fix bayonets, and tighten their grip on their Enfields. The low rumble of the rebel artillery begins to intensify, the ground shaking as the heavy guns find their range. The air fills with the screaming whistle of round shot and the terrifying buzz of grape shot. The last gasp of empire in India is about to be decided not on an open field of glory, but in the dirty, claustrophobic alleys of Lucknow. The stage is set for a collision of absolute violence, where survival will depend on the audacity of a few good men to do the impossible. The Charbar Bridge stands as the gateway to salvation, but on this humid September morning, it is a threshold of destruction. To reach the Residency, the relieving column must cross this narrow span over the canal, a tactical bottleneck that the rebel commanders have anticipated with lethal precision. As the head of the British column emerges from the cover of the Alambar, the air instantly disintegrates into a storm of iron and smoke. The rebel batteries, dug in on the opposite bank and concealed within the dense foliage of the Charbar Gardens, unleash a fury of grape shot and round shot that scythes through the ranks. For the men of the relief force, the world narrows down to the terrifying immediate. There is no grand strategy visible from the ground, only the deafening roar of artillery and the sickening thud of metal striking flesh. The bridge itself becomes a killing ground. To cross it is to walk directly into the mouth of a cannon. Yet, the momentum of desperation drives them forward. Officers wave their swords, their voices lost in the cacophony, urging the men into the smoke. They are fighting not just against a well-armed enemy, but against the very geography of Lucknow. Once across the bridge, a feat achieved through sheer bloody-minded persistence and the sacrifice of many brave men, the nature of the battle shifts dramatically. They are no longer in the open countryside, they are now inside the city proper. The relief force enters a claustrophobic nightmare of urban warfare. The streets are narrow, winding canyons flanked by high-walled compounds and flat-roofed houses. Every window is a potential sniper's nest. Every rooftop hides a squad of musketeers. The column is forced to elongate, stretching out like a wounded snake, making it vulnerable to ambush from every side. The progress is agonizingly slow. The heavy guns of the British artillery are dragged by exhausted horses and sweating men over broken pavement and through the debris of shattered barricades. The infantry, including the battle-hardened blue caps of the 1st Bengal Fusiliers and the light infantrymen of the 90th Perthshire, move in spurts of frantic activity. They dash from doorway to doorway, hugging the walls, their eyes scanning the loopholed facades above for the flash of a musket. The sensory overload is absolute. The heat radiates off the stone walls, intensifying the stench of black powder and blood. The noise is a continuous, rolling thunder that vibrates in the chest and rattles the teeth. It is in this chaotic crucible that the advance grinds to a perilous halt. Nearing the Kaiserbar Palaces, a complex of royal buildings transformed into a rebel stronghold, the column runs into a wall of fire. A concealed battery of rebel guns, positioned with devastating enfilade, begins to pour grape shot into the street. The lead elements of the infantry are pinned down, flattened against the earth or cowering behind insufficient cover. The grape shot, canvas bags filled with iron balls that turn a cannon into a giant shotgun, sweeps the street clear of life. To raise a head is to invite instant death. The advance has stalled, and with every passing minute, the rebels are reinforcing their positions, tightening the noose around the relief force. In the midst of this paralysis, a singular figure rides to the front. He is a man who seems to operate on a different frequency than the terrified soldiers around him. Captain William Olferts, an officer of the Bengal Artillery, is a legend in the making. Known universally by the moniker Hellfire Jack, Olferts presents a striking, almost theatrical image amidst the grime of battle. He is not dressed in the pristine regulation uniform of a staff officer. Instead, he wears a mishmash of civilian and military gear that gives him the appearance of a brigand or a mercenary chieftain. His reputation for coolness under fire is already whispered about in the mess halls, but today, that reputation will be tested to its breaking point. Ulfert surveys the scene with a terrifying calmness. He sees the infantry pinned down, the officers frustrated, and the rebel guns flashing rhythmically from the smoke ahead. He understands the physics of the battlefield better than most. He knows that the infantry cannot advance while that battery remains operational. He also knows that bringing up his own heavy guns to engage in an artillery duel will take too long, time that the Residency garrison does not have. The tactical equation is brutal and simple. The rebel guns must be silenced, and since they cannot be outshot from a distance, they must be taken by force. The plan that forms in Ulfert's mind is one of suicidal audacity. It is not a maneuver taught in the military academies of Woolwich or Sandhurst. It is a desperate gamble born of the immediate, bloody reality of street fighting. He realizes that someone must leave the relative safety of cover, charge directly into the zone of death, that open stretch of street swept by grapeshot, and physically capture the cannon. It is a task that looks impossible. It is a task that promises almost certain death. But as Hellfire Jack tightens the reins on his horse, his expression is not one of fear, but of grim, focused determination. He is about to cross the point of no return. To understand the sheer insanity of the moment that is about to unfold, one must look closely at the man sitting high in the saddle, exposed to every sniper in Lucknow. Captain William Ulfert's is a paradox of the Victorian military machine. In an army that prizes discipline, uniformity, and rigid adherence to the drill book, Ulfert's is a chaotic element. He is a man who seems to thrive only when the air is thick with lead. His nickname, Hellfire Jack, was earned not through reckless aggression alone, but through a terrifyingly calm demeanor in the face of annihilation. While others flinch at the whistle of a passing shell, Ulfert's is known to watch them with the detached curiosity of a cricket spectator. But here, in the smoke-choked street near the Kaiserberg, curiosity has been replaced by urgent necessity. The 90th Perthshire Light Infantry, a regiment with a proud history, is frozen. It is not cowardice that holds them back, but the biological imperative to survive. The rebel grapeshot is turning the street into a slaughterhouse. To stand up is to die. The men are pressed into the dirt, their faces buried in the dust, praying for the artillery barrage to cease. But Ulfert's knows it will not cease. He knows that unless that battery is taken, the relief column will bleed to death right here, mere miles from their goal. Ulfert's makes his decision. He does not send a subordinate. He does not wave a sword from the rear. He spurs his horse forward. The sight is jarring. A lone horseman galloping down the center of a kill zone where infantrymen fear to tread. It is an act of such brazen defiance that it momentarily stuns both friend and foe. For a split second, the rebel gunners, working their cannons with frantic efficiency, must have stared in disbelief at the madman charging straight down the barrel of their gun. Seeing their artillery officer ride into the teeth of the enemy, the paralysis of the infantry breaks. A roar goes up from the ranks of the 90th Light Infantry. If Hellfire Jack is going, they are going with him. Men scramble up from the dirt, fear replaced by a surge of adrenaline and shame, the shame of letting a lone rider charge alone. The blue caps of the 1st Bengal Fusiliers fighting nearby join the surge. The street, moments ago a place of static death, transforms into a rushing river of bayonets and red coats. The charge is a race against mechanics. Ulfert's knows he has seconds before the rebel gunners can sponge out the barrel, ram home a fresh powder charge, and load another bag of grapeshot. If they fire before he reaches them, he and his horse will be missed. The distance closes rapidly. The sound of hooves clattering on the hard-packed street mixes with the war cries of the charging British infantry. Smoke billows around them, obscuring vision. reducing the world to grey, swirling fog and the orange flashes of musketry from the windows above. Olferts reaches the battery first. He is ahead of his own men, a solitary target in the epicenter of the enemy position. The rebel gunners are there, right in front of him, desperate to trigger the next round. With a calmness that defies belief, Olferts positions himself and his horse effectively in the line of fire, becoming a physical obstruction, a chaotic whirlwind of steel and horseflesh that prevents the gunners from completing their deadly work. He slashes out, disrupting the crew, buying those precious, vital seconds for the wave of infantry to catch up. The 90th arrive a heartbeat later. They crash into the battery with the force of a sledgehammer. The scene dissolves into the brutal intimacy of close-quarters combat. There is no room for drill or formation here. It is bayonet against tulwar, rifle butt against shield. The air is filled with the sensory overload of hand-to-hand fighting, the metallic clang of steel on steel, the screams of the wounded, the heavy, grunting exertion of men fighting for their lives. The rebel gunners fight tenaciously, defending their pieces to the last, but the momentum of the charge is irresistible. In the swirling melee, Olferts remains the anchor. He has led them into the fire, and now he holds the ground. The guns, those iron monsters that had pinned down an entire army, are silenced, captured by a force of will that began with one man on a horse deciding that death was preferable to defeat. But the capture of the guns is only half the battle. As the infantry secures the position, Olferts realizes the danger is far from over. They are deep in enemy territory, and the prize they have just won is heavy, cumbersome, and surrounded by thousands of hostile sepoys. The return journey is about to begin. The capture of the guns provides a momentary respite, a gasp of air in a drowning man's lungs, but it does not bring silence. If anything, the noise of battle intensifies. The street is now a cauldron of sensory violence. The initial roar of the charge has fragmented into 1,000 individual struggles. The air is thick with the sulphurous choke of black powder, a stinging fog that waters the eyes and clings to the back of the throat. Visibility is reduced to yards. Men fire blindly into the swirling smoke, aiming at muzzle flashes or shifting shadows. The auditory landscape is terrifying. It is not just the boom of artillery anymore. It is the sharp, cracking report of the Enfield rifles used by the British and the deeper, duller thump of the smoothbore Brown Bess muskets wielded by many of the rebels. These sounds overlap into a continuous, deafening static. Above this mechanical din rise the human sounds, the guttural shouts of officers trying to maintain order, the screams of men struck by lead, and the high-pitched war cries of the rebel sepoys swarming on the rooftops. For the soldiers on the ground, the experience is disorienting. There is no clear front line. The enemy is everywhere, above, behind, and on the flanks. Bullets smack into the plaster walls, showering the men with white dust. Ricochets whine through the air like angry hornets. The captured guns, now silent, loom large in the street, heavy iron trophies that have cost so much blood. But possession is a tenuous thing. The rebels, realizing their battery has fallen, redouble their fire from the surrounding buildings. They are pouring a plunging fire down onto the exposed British troops, turning the battery position into a trap. Olferts, still amidst the carnage, understands that holding the guns is useless if they cannot be moved. They are dead weight, and worse, if left behind, they could be recaptured and turned against the column once more. The order is given to withdraw the prizes. But this is a logistical nightmare. The limbers, the horse-drawn carriages needed to tow the cannons, are back in the rear, separated from the guns by that same stretch of death-swept street they just charged across. This is the second act of Olferts' heroism, less glamorous than the charge, but perhaps even more perilous. He must return through the gauntlet. He has to go back into the fire, not to kill, but to organize. With bullets pecking at the ground around his horse's hooves, Olferts rides back to the limbers. He is a magnet for fire, a high-value target for every marksman in the windows above. Yet, He moves with that same maddening efficiency. He rallies the drivers, men who are terrified, their horses skittish and wild-eyed from the noise. He guides the limbers forward, navigating the debris-strewn street under severe musketry fire. It is a slow, agonizing process. Horses are hit and scream in pain, thrashing in their harnesses. Men rush to cut the traces, freeing the dead animals to keep the column moving. Olferts is everywhere at once, directing the teams, shouting encouragement, physically helping to hook the heavy trails of the guns onto the limbers. He is working in the center of a storm, treating the recovery of the ordnance as if it were a drill on the parade ground at Dum Dum. The physical effort required is immense. The guns are hot to the touch, blackened by powder. The men of the 90th and the Fusiliers, exhausted and adrenaline-dumped, heave against the wheels. They slip in the mud and blood, straining muscles to drag the iron beasts out of the kill zone. Olferts ensures that not a single piece is left behind. It is a point of professional pride for the artilleryman, but it is also a strategic necessity. Every gun denied to the enemy is a victory. Every gun brought to the Residency is a lifeline. As the teams finally haul the captured cannons away, retreating back toward the main column, the intensity of the moment begins to recede, replaced by the grim realization of what has just happened. They have survived the impossible. They have looked into the muzzle of the gun and lived, but the cost is visible all around them. The street is littered with the bodies of those who did not make it. Redcoats and white sepoy tunics mingled in the dust. The Bluecaps and the Perthshire men have paid a heavy price for Hellfire Jack's prize. Yet there is no time to mourn. The capture of the Kaiserbar battery was critical, but it was only one obstacle. The Residency is still distant, separated from them by more miles of hostile city. The sun is sinking lower, casting long shadows that offer new hiding places for the enemy. The relief column is battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but Olfert's charge has injected a new steel into their spine. They have seen that the enemy can be broken. They have seen that even in the narrowest trap, audacity can carve a path. The column lurches forward again, stepping over the dead, eyes fixed on the distant goal. The final push to the Residency is about to begin. The column lurches forward again, stepping over the dead, eyes fixed on the distant goal. The final push to the Residency is about to begin. But as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and charcoal, the city of Lucknow transforms. The clear lines of sight vanish, swallowed by the Indian twilight. The battle does not cease, it merely becomes blind. The relieving force is now moving through a phantasmagoria of shadows and sudden, blinding flashes. The elaborate generals Havelock and Outram, riding near the head of the column, face a critical decision. The prudent military choice would be to halt, secure a perimeter for the night, and push through the final few hundred yards by the light of day. But prudence has no place here. They can hear the sounds of the siege from the Residency, the desperate, ragged firing of the defenders who believe this might be their last stand. To stop now would be to abandon the garrison to one more night of terror, a night that might break them. The order is given. Advance at all costs. The final mile is a descent into madness. The column fragments in the maze of streets. The 78th Highlanders, their kilts swinging and bagpipes wailing a discordant keen amidst the gunfire, lead the vanguard alongside the Sikhs and the remaining Fusiliers. They plunge into the darkness of the narrow lanes leading to the Bailey Guard Gate, the main entrance to the Residency compound. The rebels, sensing the endgame, pour fire from every rooftop. It is a gauntlet of flame. Bullets strike the cobblestones, sparking in the dark. Men fall unseen, trampled by the boots of their comrades who cannot afford to stop. The rearguard, burdened with the wounded and the heavy baggage, fights a separate, lonely battle against swarms of sepoys closing in from behind. Inside the Residency, the atmosphere is electric with a terrifying hope. The garrison has heard the approaching thunder all day. They have seen the smoke rising over the city. Now they hear the distinct crack of Enfield rifles growing louder, closer. The men of the 32nd Regiment, skeletal and ragged, man the barricades at the Bailey Guard. They peer into the gloom, fingers trembling on their triggers. Is it the relief? Or is it a final, overwhelming rebel assault disguised by the night? Then they see them, emerging from the smoke and the shadows, not as a pristine parade ground army, but as a horde of demons. The relieving soldiers are black with powder, caked in mud and blood, their uniforms torn, their eyes wild with the adrenaline of the kill. They scramble over the debris of the earthworks. The Highlanders, shouting their war cries, are the first to breach the perimeter. The moment the two forces meet is one of the most poignant scenes in the history of the British Empire. There is no cheering at first, only a stunned, incredulous silence that breaks into hysteria. The big hall of the Residency, usually a place of grim suffering, erupts. The soldiers of the relief force, hardened killers who have just butchered their way through a city, drop their weapons and weep openly. They grasp the hands of the defenders, hugging the emaciated officers, staring at the women and children who emerge from the Tykhana like ghosts from the underworld. Captain Olferts, having secured his guns and brought his men through the fire, arrives in this chaotic sanctuary. The contrast between the rescuers and the rescued is stark. The garrison looks like walking corpses, pale and gaunt from months of famine and disease. The relievers look like rough-hewn giants, filthy and exhausted. The blue caps of the fusiliers share their rations, scraps of biscuit and rum, with men who haven't seen a full meal in weeks. But this reunion is held under the shadow of continuing war. The relief force has broken in, but they have not broken the siege. They are now trapped alongside the garrison. The rebels still hold the city. The loopholed houses overlooking the Residency are still occupied by enemy marksmen. The arrival of Havelock and Outram has saved the garrison from immediate massacre, but it has also added 2,000 more mouths to feed in a place with no food. The jubilation of the night is tempered by the cold reality of the morning. They are all prisoners now, yet something fundamental has changed. The psychological siege is broken. The garrison is no longer alone. They have seen the lengths to which their comrades would go to reach them. They have witnessed the impossible charge of men like Olferts. The Victoria Cross has not yet been pinned to his chest, but the spirit it represents, that refusal to yield to overwhelming odds, has infected the entire compound. The Residency is no longer a tomb. It is a fortress once again. In the cold light of the morning following the relief, the magnitude of Captain William Olfert's actions begins to crystallize, separating itself from the general chaos of the battle. The guns he captured, those iron beasts that had spewed death at the 90th Light Infantry, are now parked within the Residency perimeter. They are no longer threats, they are assets, turned around to face their former masters. But their presence is more than just a tactical victory. They are physical evidence of a moment where the impossible was rendered possible through sheer force of will. It is for this specific act that William Olferts will be immortalized. The Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration available to a soldier of the British Empire, is a relatively new honor at this time. Instated by Queen Victoria only a year prior, in the wake of the Crimean War, it was born from a desire to recognize valor regardless of rank or birth. It is a simple object, a cross-pate made of dark bronze, allegedly cast from the cascabels of Russian cannons captured at Sevastopol. It carries no gemstones, no gold, only the simple inscription, "For valor." Yet, in the hierarchy of military honor, it outweighs everything else. Olfert's citation, when it eventually appears in the London Gazette, is a study in understated military prose. It speaks of highly distinguished conduct. It notes his charge on horseback to capture the two guns in the face of heavy fire. But crucially, it highlights the second half of his heroism, the return. The citation explicitly mentions his coolness in returning under severe musketry to organize the limbers and horses to drag the prizes away. This detail is vital. It distinguishes the reckless glory seeker from the professional soldier. A glory seeker charges, a professional ensures the job is finished. Olferts did both. To earn the Victoria Cross in the Indian Mutiny is to join a fraternity of men who have stared into the abyss. But Olferts' award carries a specific resonance. He represents the archetype of the eccentric Victorian hero, the man whose individuality is not crushed by the system, but is instead harnessed by it. Hellfire Jack becomes a household name not just because he fought, but because he fought with a distinct style. His bravery was not a grim duty. It appeared to be an expression of his character. In an era where the British public is hungry for heroes to offset the horror stories of Cawnpore and the mismanagement of the war, Olferts fits the mould perfectly. The significance of the award extends beyond the man himself. It serves to validate the suffering of the relief column. The 535 casualties sustained by Havelock's force in that single rush through the city are a staggering price to pay. Without moments of transcendent heroism like the charge at the Kaiserberg battery, such losses might be viewed as a waste, a butcher's bill for a failed strategy. The Victoria Cross transforms the narrative. It turns a desperate, bloody street brawl into a saga of gallantry. It provides a focal point for national pride, a shining diamond in the coal dust of a brutal counterinsurgency. However, for the men in the Residency, the medal is an abstraction. The reality is the man. Olferts does not rest on his laurels. Throughout the second phase of the siege, for the garrison is now besieged again, just with more men, he remains a visible, steadying presence. He continues to expose himself to fire, directing the artillery, advising the engineers, and maintaining that peculiar air of invulnerability that strengthens the resolve of those around him. The soldiers see the VC not as a reward for a past action, but as a confirmation of the quality of leader they are following today. The legacy of this specific Victoria Cross is also a testament to the changing face of war. Olferts' action was a collision of the old and the new. He rode a horse like a medieval knight, but he secured modern artillery pieces in an urban combat environment that presaged the warfare of the 20th century. His award acknowledges that even in the age of industrial slaughter, where battles are decided by logistics and weight of fire, the individual spirit still matters. It affirms that one man, seizing the initiative in a split second of terror, can alter the course of a battle, save a column, and keep the flame of resistance burning in the darkest of hours. While the Victoria Cross shines as a beacon of individual valour, the light it casts throws long, dark shadows across the city of Lucknow. To focus solely on the heroism of men like William Olferts is to see only one facet of a diamond that is otherwise caked in blood and grime. The relief of the Residency was a tactical success, but it was a human catastrophe. The euphoria of the meeting between Havelock's men and the garrison quickly evaporates into the stifling reality of the aftermath. The compound is now a vast open-air hospital, a charnel house where the cost of empire is paid in flesh and bone. The banqueting hall, once a venue for opulent colonial dinners, has become a place of medieval torment. Surgeons, their aprons stiff with dried blood, work by the light of flickering oil lamps. There is a critical shortage of chloroform and opiates. Amputations are performed with a leather strap to bite on and a glass of rum if one is lucky. The screams of the wounded, both the defenders who have languished for months and the relievers who are torn apart in the streets, echo through the night, a counterpoint to the intermittent sniper fire that continues from the rooftops. This suffering is not limited to the British. The fighting through the streets of Lucknow has been a war of extermination. The Redcoat era, often romanticized in paintings of neat lines and gallant charges, reveals its ugliest face here. The rules of war, tenuous at the best of times, have been utterly abandoned. The relief force, enraged by the stories of the massacre at Cawnpore, has given no quarter. Every captured rebel sepoy is bayoneted or shot. The streets Olferts rode through are lined not just with fallen soldiers, but with the wreckage of a city being systematically dismantled by conflict. It is a fratricidal war. The men fighting on the rebel side, the sepoys of the Bengal army, wear the same red coats as their attackers. They carry the same muskets, shout orders in the same mix of English and Hindi, and in many cases, wear medals awarded by the British East India Company for past service in Afghanistan or against the Sikhs. They are fighting with the desperation of men who know there is no turning back. They know that surrender means execution, often by being blown from the mouth of a cannon, a punishment designed to destroy the body so completely that it affects the soul's journey in the afterlife. This knowledge makes them fight with a ferocity that stuns the British commanders. The events at Lucknow mark a seismic shift in the history of the subcontinent. The sheer scale of the violence, the desperation of the siege, and the near collapse of British authority sound the death knell for the Honourable East India Company. A commercial trading entity, no matter how powerful, can no longer manage a subcontinent in flames. The bravery of individuals like Olferts is the last gasp of the old order. In London, the shock of the mutiny is already hardening hearts. The narrative is shifting from one of commerce and alliance to one of imperial dominance and racial separation. The trust that once existed, however imperfectly, between the sepoy and the officer is shattered forever, replaced by a cold, watchful suspicion that will define the British Raj for the next 90 years. Inside the Residency, the strategic situation remains dire. Havelock and Outram have entered the trap, but they lack the strength to break out with the women, children, and wounded. They are now besieged themselves, adding their numbers to the starving garrison. The first relief has become a reinforcement. They must now wait for a second, larger army under Sir Colin Campbell to cut its way through. For Olferts, the war continues. The adrenaline of the charge has faded, replaced by the grinding attrition of siege warfare. He remains a critical asset, his guns answering the rebel batteries day after day. But the psychological toll of the environment is immense. Courage in a single moment of high-octane combat is one thing. Courage in the face of dysentery, watching friends wither away from starvation, and the ceaseless, nerve-shredding noise of bombardment is another. It is a testament to the resilience of the Victorian soldier that discipline holds. They are isolated on a hostile continent, thousands of miles from home, fighting not for a flag or a queen, but for the person standing next to them. As the weeks drag on, the legend of the relief begins to take shape. It is forged in the fires of Lucknow, hammered out on the anvil of the Charbar Bridge. The story of Hellfire Jack and the capture of the Kaiserbar battery becomes a talisman, a reminder that even when the walls are crumbling and the ammunition is low, the spirit of attack can turn the tide. But as historians will later reflect, this heroism is set against a backdrop of tragedy. It is a story of bravery, yes, but also of a profound failure of governance and understanding that led to the slaughter of thousands. The charge saved the guns, and it saved the moment, but it could not undo the scars that the mutiny would leave on the soul of India. The story of the siege of Lucknow does not end with the arrival of Havelock and Outram, nor does it end with the daring exploits of William Olferts and that September afternoon. The war would grind on. It would take another 2 months of desperate defence before Sir Colin Campbell's second relief force finally broke the siege for good in November, allowing for the evacuation of the women, children, and wounded. The Residency, the stage for this grand and terrible drama, was eventually abandoned to the rebels, only to be recaptured months later in a final, crushing offensive. But the spirit of the place had been forged in those 87 days and cemented by the arrival of the first relief. Captain William Olferts survived the mutiny, a feat that defies statistical probability, given his penchant for standing where the fire was hottest. He did not fade into obscurity. He rose through the ranks, eventually becoming General Sir William Olferts, VC, GCB. He lived until 1902, passing away at the dawn of a new century, a living relic of a bygone era of warfare. To the end, he carried the moniker Hellfire Jack, a name that commanded respect in mess halls from London to Calcutta. But one imagines that in the quiet of his later years, his mind often drifted back to the heat and noise of the Charbar Bridge, to the smell of black powder, and to the faces of the men of the 90th who followed him into the mouth of the cannon. Today, the Lucknow residency still stands, preserved as a protected monument by the Archaeological Survey of India. It is a hauntingly beautiful place. The shattered walls of the banqueting hall, the pockmarked facade of the Dr. Farah's house, and the ruin of the Bailey Guard Gate remain exactly as the war left them, scared by shot and shell. It is a park now, where tourists walk on manicured lawns that once covered shallow graves. The violence has long since evaporated, replaced by a somber peace. Yet, the physical scars on the brickwork serve as a braille of history, allowing us to touch the intensity of what transpired here. The Victoria Cross awarded to Olferts is more than just a piece of bronze. It is a lens through which we view the complexities of the past. It forces us to confront the duality of the human experience in war. On one hand, it represents the brutal machinery of imperialism, the enforcement of dominion through superior firepower and aggression. On the other, it represents the timeless, apolitical quality of courage, the ability of a human being to suppress the primal instinct for survival in service of a cause or a comrade. Olfert's charge was not a strategic masterstroke that won the war. It was a tactical necessity that saved a column. But in the grand narrative of military history, it stands as a testament to the last charge of a certain style of leadership. It was the era of the officer who led from the front, whose authority was derived not just from his commission, but from his willingness to bleed first. As the 19th century gave way to the industrialized slaughter of the 20th, such individual acts would become harder to distinguish in the mud of the Somme or the sands of El Alamein. We look back at the siege of Lucknow not to glorify the politics of the East India Company, nor to ignore the suffering of the Indian people caught in the crossfire of rebellion. We look back to understand the extremes of human endurance. The defenders of Lucknow and the men who fought through the city to save them were pushed beyond the limits of what seemed possible. They existed in a crucible of fear, disease, and death, and yet they found the will to stand. The legacy of Hellfire Jack is the legacy of that moment when the choice is made. When the battery is firing, the infantry is pinned, and the air is thick with death, one man decides to ride forward. It is a moment of pure, crystallized will. And as long as history is written, the echo of hooves on the cobblestones of Lucknow will continue to resonate, a reminder of the unbelievable bravery of the Empire's last charge. The Siege of Lucknow remains one of the most harrowing and heroic chapters in military history, a story where the line between bravery and madness was constantly blurred. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Redcoat era and the story of Hellfire Jack Olferts, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have followed him into that charge? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a briefing from the front lines of history. Until next time, keep the powder dry.